I went to school with the Presentation Brothers, and at school they had a great influence on me. I was impressed with them not only as teachers, as human beings, but also as people of prayer. At a young age, I began to think of some type of religious vocation. I can remember when I was 12 years old, at the end of primary school, my father had a serious illness of the eye. He was out of work for considerable time. I was the eldest in the family, and I realized that this could be very serious. Thankfully, he recovered fully. But at that time, I began to think of a religious vocation. I was an altar boy in my parish, so I would have thought of priesthood. And I think later then, at the end of secondary school, when I began to think more seriously, the fact that I had had contact with the brothers put me in the direction of looking at this group. And of course, when I decided to join the brothers, and during my years of training and formation, I more deeply came to understand that this was my call, and I was more deeply attracted to the group and gradually grew into it. I think a vocation is a process of growth. It happens over quite a number of years in one's life. And the influences at the beginning can seem accidental, but I suppose, as people of faith, we would see all that as having a profound meaning. God calls through the people, the events, and the experiences of life. All of humanity, all of human living is drenched with divinity in that sense. Grace is everywhere if we have eyes to see it and if we open our ears to it. So sometimes people experience a dramatic moment of call. We read sometimes about that, St. Paul on the road to Damascus. For many Christians, however, the moment is not dramatic in that sense maybe, but it's over a period of a number of years in one's life. God calls us, speaks to us in our heart through moments of prayer, reflection and meditation. God can speak to us through our friends, our family, our brothers and sisters, people who are close to us, who affirm, encourage and love us. God can speak to us through the events and experiences of our lives, both the very joyful events and also through events of great suffering and great pain. God is present there as well. So through all of these experiences, the Spirit is speaking to us, is nudging us. And if we are open to that, then we can see and hear in a new way. And vocation becomes not just a notion, but something very real. And it is a kind of a love experience. Ultimately, it is, one can describe it in certain ways and give certain reasons and certain moments. But ultimately, it is a profound mystery. Not in the sense that one can't explain it, but one can never explain it fully, because it's deeper than that. On the question of how one can be sure if God is calling one to a religious vocation, I think there are a number of helps. One is to take time with it, because God works in gentleness. God works over time in our lives. The other is to be living a faith life, a life of prayer and a life of service of others, because then we're open to how God is speaking to us day by day. A good spiritual director is also helpful in the process. But I don't think one can ever be totally sure in a kind of a scientific or a rational sense. There is always that element of a leap of faith. There is always the element of finally coming to a stage where one believes this is the call and is willing to risk and make that response. And then the affirmation or the confirmation may come in unexpected ways. The vocation of brother, I think, is a vocation that needs far more explanation. For me, it's a very important vocation. Obviously, I've chosen to follow it myself. I think if we look upon God as Father, then we are all brothers and sisters. First of all, in a human sense, but more profoundly, we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And the vocation of the religious brother, or indeed the religious sister, by its very title, witnesses in a particular way to that core value of the Christian life, of brotherhood, of sisterhood, of sharing, of equality. And it's a different vocation to the vocation of the married person or the vocation of the single person or indeed the ordained ministry of the priest. So I see the ultimate meaning of the vocation in the title itself. It's a constant reminder to the rest of the church of what we're all about. The three vows which are in the Catholic tradition, which people in religious orders take, are the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I think they require some explanation today to understand them in more contemporary terms. The vow of poverty really is about putting God at the center of one's life and a total dependence of God, living a lifestyle which is based on sharing and simplicity and making not just one's possessions and goods, but one's entire talents available to the service of others. The vow of chastity for me has to be explained in terms of a life of love, because all of us are searching for love. To give love and to receive love is what human living is about. And the vow of chastity, or the vow of consecrated celibacy, calls a person to love in a different way, different to the vocation of married life or the vocation of the single Christian or other vocations. But it is fundamentally about a life of love. The example I would use would be the great Mother Teresa, who lived a life of great love. I often say to young people, when she was young, searching for her vocation, she too needed encouragement. She too experienced doubts and fears. And if she were discouraged, look at what the world would have lost in terms of a life of great love. I don't think anybody would say that her living of consecrated celibacy was not a life of love. So for me, the vow of chastity is also another way of loving. And the vow of obedience wouldn't have like connotations as it would in military organizations. It's fundamentally going back to the idea of obedience coming from the Latin word obaudire, to listen for God. And together, as a group of brothers, we try to listen to and for God in the call and the needs of our time. And then we try to live our life out of that listening, so that we recognize that there is someone greater than ourselves who calls us to a life of love. And obedience is really about listening to that call and coming together with others who share the same passion for that call. So the vows really are a love experience. They are a particular way of following Jesus Christ. And I think they have a great relevance in the world today, because they lived at their best and lived authentically. They model an alternative lifestyle to some of the more dominant lifestyles which are being pushed at people. I think if you go back to the early centuries of Christianity, men and women disenchanted with the lifestyle in the dominant empire, the Roman Empire, the cities of the time, disenchanted with that culture and its values, went into the desert to explore a deeper form of living of the Christian life. And out of that, the desert fathers, the desert mothers, and so on, out of that movement of men and women grew various forms of community, including the development of monasticism later on, and so on. I believe that religious life today, properly reformed as it were, must do something similar. It must witness to an alternative lifestyle to some of the dominant values of the culture, the empire in which we live in today. And I think that's good for church and society. I'm not saying that everything about the society in which we live is wrong. There are some tremendous things about it. But there are also some values which need to be challenged, and an alternative needs to be modeled. And that alternative is valuable for both church and society. So I would see that religious communities today and faith communities generally could do something in terms of modeling an alternative to some of the dominant lifestyles that are being pushed at people, and facilitating spaces and places where people can explore and come in touch again with the world of spirit. The advice I would give to a person considering a vocation today would be to, first of all, go deeply inside your own heart and pray and listen there to your truest and best self, because that's where the Spirit works. Try to put aside the surface fears and the doubts and the sense of inadequacy and so on, and go get in touch with your inner dream, with what you're really passionate about, and there listen to the voice of the Spirit. So I'm really saying you must pray, you must reflect. You must also then listen to people around you who love you, friends and close family members who understand you. And when you share your dream with them, if they respect it, if they encourage you, I think that's an important part of the process. And sometimes they challenge you as well, and that's also part of the process. And then I think the help of reading the scriptures, of taking part in the sacramental life of the church, of reaching out to others in need. If you want to embrace a vocation to religious life, you must first of all be living the Christian life, because religious life, if you like, is a particular living out of the Christian life. So living the Christian life is the first task. Blessed John Henry Newman, somebody wrote to him one time in a letter saying, I would love to have your faith. And I think he replied saying, if you want to have faith, give alms. In reaching out to those in need, in seeing Christ in those in need, we ourselves are enriched. So there's prayer, there is listening to people, there is reaching out to those in need. All of these things, I think, are part of the vocational journey. And finally, of course, a very important thing is to make contact with the Presentation Brothers, because you need to make contact with a particular group, because that's when vocation takes on reality. It can be very vague until you actually begin to dialogue with a particular group and begin to know them and begin to ask more serious questions. We need more Presentation Brothers in Ireland today. More profoundly than that, Christ needs more brothers, because there is so much work to do. There is a great mission, and I believe that the Spirit is working to call people to this way of life and to make a new response to it today in Ireland.